Stop resisting. The shout tears through the garage like a lie that needs volume to survive. There is no resistance, only a black woman beside her own car, shopping bags mid-air, hands visible, body still. The accusation arrives first. Evidence can catch up later. The body cam is already blinking red, obedient and unforgiving. Officer, I am a federal judge. The truth is delivered without heat, no tremor, no bargaining, no fear to feed on. That calm is the insult. Men who confuse authority with dominance cannot tolerate composure. They read it as defiance. I don't care. Ignorance answers with confidence. Arrogance seals the record. At that moment, survival leaves the room. Every lens wakes up security cameras, phones lifting at the edges, the city's memory switching on. Time doesn't slow for mercy. It slows for capture. His glove slams the hood. Metal cries out. Not a warning, a confession. He shoves her, harder than needed, louder than necessary. Force for the sake of theater. Dominance mistaken for law. He believes escalation creates control. It only creates receipts. She stumbles once and steadies. She does not fall. She does not plead. She has dismantled men like this in quieter rooms with softer voices. She recognizes the pattern instantly. A small man sprinting toward a cliff, convinced momentum is armor. He feels righteous. He feels untouchable. That feeling is the tell. That feeling is how careers die publicly, permanently, on camera. The cameras drink it all in, the shouted lie, the calm truth, the contemptuous dismissal, the gratuitous force. Seconds stack into exhibits. Choices harden into charges. There is no fork left in the road, only a straight line to consequence. He thinks this is command. It's a countdown. From here on, nothing saves him, not the badge, not the union, not the city scrambling behind closed doors. The bill is already accruing interest. The settlement is already being drafted. The sentence wasn't spoken. It was executed. The underground parking garage hums with indifferent machinery. Fluorescent lights bleach the concrete into a colorless grid. Engines pass above, their echoes hollow and distant, as if the place itself has learned not to care. Judge Nyla Grant is doing the most ordinary thing possible. She lifts a paper bag, sets it into the trunk, adjusts another so it won't tip. No rush, no hesitation, no furtive glances, just the slow, deliberate movements of someone finishing a weekend errand. There is nothing suspicious here. No broken glass, no forced entry, no nervous pacing. Just groceries, just a car, just a woman. Her clothes are unremarkable, practical, muted, chosen for comfort, not authority. No robe, no badge, no symbols of power. In this moment, she looks like exactly who the law claims to protect. A private citizen minding her own business. Her hands remain visible, always visible. Her movements are measured, predictable. She does not turn away. She does not advance. Every signal says non-threat. Every signal says safe. The audience understands this instantly. The injustice registers before the argument even begins. When she speaks, her voice does not rise. It does not sharpen. It does not plead. It is low, precise, disciplined, trained by years of courtrooms where emotion is a liability. She does not argue feelings. She does not demand respect. She does not reach for her identity as a weapon. She does everything right. And that is what makes what happens next unbearable. The omniscient truth hangs heavy in the air. She is not seeking special treatment. She is not invoking power. She is obeying the social contract exactly as written. The law could not ask more of her if it tried. Her calm is not a weakness. It is restraint. And restraint, in moments like this, becomes evidence. The distance between her and the officer shrinks. A step closer. Then another. The space tightens, not yet violent, but no longer neutral. The air changes. The audience feels it before anyone moves. This is the pivot point. From woman who is right to woman who has been selected. The call that brought him here was thin, barely a sentence. No urgency, no detail. Black woman, Near a luxury vehicle. That was all. No report of theft. No description of behavior. No allegation of a crime in progress. This was not information. It was instinct. And instinct, when dressed up as duty, becomes dangerous. The omniscient verdict is immediate and unflinching. This is not policing. This is pattern recognition, trained by prejudice, a feeling mistaken for fact, a discomfort mislabeled as suspicion. The audience feels the shift. Moral distance opens up. They know they would not have made this choice. Rage is born here, not explosive, but righteous, controlled, earned. The officer does not ask more questions. He does not widen his scan of the environment. He does not reassess when nothing adds up. He chooses. That choice matters more than the call itself. This is not circumstance. It is selection. In his mind, the justification is simple, almost comforting. I'm just doing my job. This is routine. Better safe than sorry. These are the phrases that build scandals brick by brick. The omniscient voice cuts through the rationalization without mercy. This is how every career-ending case begins, with confidence unsupported by facts, with authority unexamined, with a man who believes momentum will protect him from consequence. He steps closer. She turns to face him. For a fraction of a second, nothing moves. No words, no sound. Just the quiet click of a record being opened. He thinks he's starting an investigation. In reality, he has just opened a file, and it will not close quietly. He closes the distance without invitation. Not a sprint, not a rush. Just a deliberate step into her personal space, close enough to dominate the frame, close enough to remind her who believes he owns the moment. His shoulders square, his stance widens, one hand drifts near his weapon, not to draw it, but to let the implication breathe. This is no longer observation. This is imposition. Step away from the vehicle. The command is issued without reason, without context, without legal spine. It is a sentence built on volume, not law. Judge Nyla Grant does not flinch. She does not mirror his posture. She does not raise her voice to match his. She asks the correct question. Quietly, precisely. What is the reasonable suspicion? It is the kind of question that exposes emptiness. He does not answer it. He repeats the order instead, louder this time, as if repetition could manufacture authority where none exists. What crime is being investigated? She asks. Again, no answer. Only tone, only posture, only the brittle performance of control. When power lacks facts, it reaches for sound. When it cannot justify itself, it attempts to overwhelm. The omniscient truth settles in. The Constitution is being handled like a suggestion. Movement appears at the edges. A car slows. A passerby hesitates. A phone rises. Lens pointed not in bravery, but in instinct. No one intervenes. No one challenges him. Silence gathers, because silence is safe. Witnesses do not mean resistance. They mean distance. This is the first exit ramp. He could stop here. He could recalibrate. He could disengage with nothing more than embarrassment and a line in a logbook. The law would allow it. Common sense would encourage it. He does not take it. He steps closer. The space tightens. The air changes. The road narrows. Judge Grant makes a calculation that does not belong in a free society but is made every day within it. Arguments in parking garages turn dangerous, especially for black women, especially when authority feels challenged, especially when cameras are present and pride is engaged. She chooses survival. I'm going to comply, she says, evenly. But I want it noted that I do not consent and that this stop lacks reasonable suspicion. She narrates her movements the way people do when they know the rules, but do not trust the person enforcing them. I'm reaching for my wallet. Slow, deliberate. Hands visible. No sudden turns. No ambiguity. Compliance performed perfectly, not out of submission, but calculation. The audience understands the cruelty of it immediately. Doing everything right does not stop what comes next. She hands over her identification. He takes it, scans it, then looks at the vehicle as if the metal itself might confess. She presses the key fob. The car responds instantly. Lights flash, locks click. Ownership proven in a language even arrogance understands. This should end it. It does not. The omniscient verdict is absolute. Every legal threshold has been met. There is no reasonable suspicion left to stand on, no justification to continue, no cause to escalate. The law is complete. He doubles down anyway. You're being uncooperative, he says. It is a lie dressed as frustration. Not to clarify the situation, only to preserve his posture in front of witnesses. Pride demands momentum. Momentum demands time. Am I being detained? She asks. Yes. On what grounds? No answer. Am I free to go? No. The law has now been abandoned entirely. What remains is theater. Control without cause. Detention without justification. The audience feels the pressure peak, not explosive, but suffocating. The knowledge that correctness offers no shield tightens the chest. He turns away with her license in hand, walking toward his cruiser as if distance will produce legitimacy, as if a database can rescue a decision already made. The cameras continue to roll. The phones remain raised. The fluorescent lights hum, indifferent. Judge Grant stands beside her car, still, waiting. Not because she believes this will resolve itself, but because she knows what comes next must be documented. The omniscient conclusion lands with cold certainty. When truth fails to end an encounter, power will attempt force. Not yet, but soon. The door that closed behind him does not reopen, it seals. From here, there is no correction, only escalation. Inside the patrol car, Officer Ethan Cole does not rush. He sits. The engine idles. The glow of the onboard computer washes his face in pale blue light. Time stretches not because procedure requires it, but because fabrication does. This is the space where facts are weighed and found insufficient, where silence becomes an ingredient, where a justification must be assembled from thin air. This is not an investigation. This is a pause to invent one. Outside the windshield, Judge Nyla Grant remains where he left her, still, upright, waiting. The cameras continue their quiet work. Fluorescent lights hum. Nothing changes, and that is precisely the problem. Cole steps out of the cruiser with a different posture than before. The confidence is forced now, rehearsed, authority being performed rather than exercised. He has decided that ending this would cost him face, and so he chooses escalation instead. I'm going to need to search your vehicle. There it is. The line crossed cleanly. No explanation, no probable cause, just the naked assertion of power reaching where it has no right to go. The audience recognizes it instantly, the Constitution treated like an inconvenience. Judge Grant does not raise her voice. She does not bristle. She does not plead. I do not consent to any searches, she says calmly. I have receipts for everything I purchased. There is no basis for a search. This is a lawful refusal. Textbook, measured, correct. The omniscient truth lands hard. Refusal is not a crime, but power has always pretended otherwise. Cole's jaw tightens. He recalibrates. The story he needs is still incomplete. Your refusal makes me suspicious. The sentence is absurd and dangerous. This is legal alchemy rights transmuted into guilt. The audience knows it. He knows it too. But saying it aloud is how the lie becomes operational. He steps closer. Just one pace. Enough to shrink space. Enough to signal threat without committing to it. His hand settles near his weapon, not drawing, not touching, just close enough to be understood. Violence has not happened, but it has been suggested. Cortisol spikes. This is no longer theoretical. This is the edge where encounters tip. Judge Grant holds her ground. You do not have reasonable suspicion, she says evenly. If this continues, I am requesting a supervisor. This is the second exit ramp. Clear, available, clean. Cole ignores it. That choice matters. The omniscient judgment is unforgiving. This is not confusion. This is will. He is not misunderstanding the law. He is rejecting it. The door to correction closes quietly behind him. From here, There is only confrontation. Judge Grant understands something now that he does not. This escalation will not de-escalate itself. She has waited long enough, not out of fear, but precision. Disclosure, when used correctly, is not a weapon. It is a fact, introduced at the moment. It can no longer be ignored. She speaks, and her voice does not change. I am a United States federal judge. No flourish, no threat, no explanation. The words fall into the space between them and detonate silently. The garage stills. Cole's shoulders dip just slightly. His hand drifts away from his weapon without instruction. A fraction of a second passes, where the performance drops and reality intrudes. He understands. And the understanding arrives too late. Judge Grant continues, measured as ever. You have detained me without reasonable suspicion. You have attempted to search my vehicle without probable cause. You are now personally liable. Then the legal blade slides in clean. You've just lost qualified immunity. She does not emphasize it. She does not raise her voice. She does not explain what it means. She doesn't need to. The audience knows. He knows. She produces her federal credentials. The card is unremarkable in appearance, plain, official, indisputable. The camera catches his hands as he takes it. There is a tremor now, small, involuntary. Truth does not argue. It simply exists. This is the moment most men would stop. This is where damage control still lives, where a supervisor can be called, where apologies can begin to soften the fall. Judge Grant offers him that final chance. Call your supervisor, she says. End this now. Silence. Cole looks at the badge. Look at her. Look at the phones recording from the periphery. The calculation happens in real time. Pride versus survival, ego versus consequence. He hands the credentials back and chooses wrong. The omniscient verdict seals itself. He has seen the cliff and stepped forward anyway. He straightens, reasserts posture, reclaims the mask. Turn around, he says. This is no longer ignorance. This is defiance. The cameras keep rolling. The witnesses do not look away. The city's future paperwork is being written second by second. He thinks he is regaining control. In reality, he is finalizing the record. From this point on, nothing can save him. Not procedure, not union language, not the city scrambling to contain what has already escaped. The prophecy is no longer implied. It is locked. He has chosen authority over law. And law will answer. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The words land without legal framing, without explanation, without the pretense of procedure. There is no statute invoked, no cause articulated, only command raw and final. This is the sentence that cannot be unsaid. Judge Nyla Grant does not argue. She does not remind him who she is. She does not repeat the warning he already understands. The decision has been made. Further words would only serve his narrative. She turns, not in fear, not in submission, in strategy. The omniscient truth is unforgiving. This is not surrender. This is containment. She knows what resistance would buy her here, nothing but risk. Compliance, performed cleanly, becomes the sharpest evidence. Metal appears in his hand. The cuffs hang for a fraction of a second, catching the fluorescent light. The sound they make when they separate is unmistakable, mechanical, indifferent, permanent. Cameras tighten their focus. Phones adjust their angles. The city's memory leans in. He hesitates. Barely. A tremor flickers through his fingers. The moment stretches just long enough for the possibility of stopping to exist. He does not stop. Hands behind your back, he repeats, as if repetition could convert error into authority. She complies. Her wrists align. Still, steady, waiting. He steps closer. The cuffs close around her skin. Click. No music. No cutaway. The sound is allowed to stand alone, an audible seal. The point of no return locks into place. You're under arrest, he says, grasping for a reason that will survive what he's done. For interfering with an investigation. The omniscient judgment is immediate and absolute. There is no investigation. There never was. There is only a sequence of choices, collapsing under their own weight. Every camera captures it. The body cam on his chest, the security cameras mounted overhead, the phones now raised high enough to block out the lights. No narration required, no witness statements needed. The record is complete. Judge Grant does not lower her head. She does not stiffen. She does not react at all. The absence of emotion is not weakness, it is indictment. Silence, here, is the loudest testimony. The officer exhales hard, as if forcing air back into a chest that suddenly feels too tight. He has crossed the line that cannot be uncrossed. He has arrested the one person uniquely equipped to dismantle him. The omniscient verdict lands cold and final. He has not asserted control. He has authored catastrophe. The door behind this moment slams shut. From mistake to disaster, there is no space left to turn around. The crowd forms the way storms do, quietly at first, then all at once. Footsteps slow, cars hesitate, engines idle longer than necessary. People who meant to pass through begin to stop. A loose ring takes shape, tightening with each second. No one steps forward. Everyone watches. A voice carries low and fast, barely above a whisper. She's a federal judge. The words move faster than the officer can. From mouth to mouth, from screen to screen. Recognition spreads like heat. Phones rise higher. This is no longer a private abuse of power. It has crossed the invisible boundary into spectacle, into proof, into something that will not be contained by reports or explanations. Judge Grant stands cuffed, posture unchanged. She does not scan the faces. She does not search for sympathy. She offers no performance of dignity because dignity does not need to perform. The omniscient truth sharpens. Her silence is the charge sheet. Every second, she says nothing. The accusation against him grows heavier. The officer's authority begins to fracture. His eyes move too quickly now, left, right, back again, tracking cameras he can no longer control. His commands lose their crisp edges. His voice strains to project certainty that has already drained away. He knows. He knows this moment has escaped him. Back up, he orders. To no one in particular. The words land, soft, ineffective. The crowd does not move. Phones keep recording. The ritual has begun. He guides her forward. The walk is short, but it stretches. Each step carries weight. Each movement is watched. This is humiliation by procession, a public accounting performed in slow motion. Judge Grant moves with him, not because he leads, but because the record requires completion. She walks through the corridor of eyes, through the lattice of lenses, through the evidence being minted in real time. Some faces register shock, others recognition. A few look away. Most keep watching. The omniscient judgment spares no one. Witnesses are not neutral. They are participants by presence. History will remember who stepped aside and who lifted a camera. At the cruiser, the officer opens the door with hands that no longer trust themselves. He pauses again. Another chance flickers. Another moment to stop digging. It passes. He seats her in the back. The door closes. Thud. Inside the car, Judge Grant sits still. The plastic bench is cold. The air smells of disinfectant and stale coffee. She does not shift. She does not speak. Her mind is already elsewhere, assembling timelines, cataloging violations, preserving evidence. Outside, the crowd holds. Phones remain raised. The omniscient conclusion settles like a verdict read aloud. If this can happen to a federal judge, in daylight, on camera, after warnings, what happens to everyone else? The question hangs unanswered, heavy with implication. From this humiliation will come exposure. From exposure, consequence. From consequence, reckoning. The system has been awakened, and it will not fall back asleep. The station doors close behind them with a sound that is neither dramatic nor loud, just final, the kind of sound people remember long after they forget the words spoken inside. Judge Nyla Grant is escorted down a narrow hallway washed in fluorescent light. The walls are scuffed, where shoulders have brushed them for decades. The floor bears the dull shine of a place designed for waiting, not resolution. Time doesn't pass here, it accumulates. Heads lift as she passes. Some look away quickly. Others stare a beat too long. No one asks questions. No one intervenes. Procedure carries her forward, running on inertia. She is seated in the processing area. The cuffs remain on, not out of necessity, out of habit. Delay becomes a choice when no one is in a hurry to correct a mistake. A female officer approaches with practiced movements. Personal effects, phone, keys, wallet. The ritual unfolds the way it always does, until it doesn't. The wallet opens. The federal credentials sit plainly inside. No theatrics, no explanation, just a fact, occupying space. The officer freezes. She looks at the card, looks at Nyla Grant, looks again, slower this time. Something recalibrates behind her eyes. She says nothing. She closes the wallet carefully and stands. She walks straight to the watch commander's office. Inside, the lieutenant is reviewing paperwork, half listening to a radio squawk. He looks up at the credentials in her hand. His gaze locks on the seal. The title, the jurisdiction. 3 seconds pass. Those seconds are when the system realizes it has turned its force inward. He stands immediately. They walk back together. He sees Nyla Grant sitting upright, composed, cuffs still locked. He sees the officer who brought her in, standing too rigid, too silent. "Remove the cuffs," the lieutenant says. No anger, no performance. Just the first correct order issued since this began. Metal opens, not with relief, with acknowledgement. "Judge Grant," he says quietly, "I'm the watch commander. I apologize for this situation." She does not respond right away. "I want everything," she says calmly. The initial call, all body cam footage, parking lot cameras, the arrest report, the stated probable cause. Tonight, he nods once. There is no negotiation left to attempt. Elsewhere in the station, Officer Ethan Cole stands alone. Conversations stop when he enters rooms, not out of hostility, out of risk management. The system does not circle wagons around a liability this clear. The machinery begins to shift, not toward justice but toward containment. Judge Grant leaves the station without spectacle. No reporters yet, no flashing lights. Consequences rarely arrive announced. The door closes behind her again, this time opening outward. She sits in the car for a moment before starting the engine. No music, no shaking hands. Her mind is already organizing events into structure. The first call is made within minutes. A name is spoken. A voice changes on the other end of the line. No details needed, yet only confirmation. The second call follows. A civil rights attorney. Trusted, efficient, time, location, status of evidence. Enough said. The third call is not emotional. It is procedural. Systems that still care about legitimacy prefer early warning when they are about to be tested. By morning, paperwork moves faster than people ever could. Evidence preservation notices, data retention orders, requests for copies, body cam files duplicated, civilian footage archived, timestamps sealed. The arrest report circulates among people who were never at the parking garage. They read it once, then again. The gaps are obvious, the language thin, the justification hollow. No one debates whether the stop was lawful. They debate exposure. In a closed room, the city attorney watches the footage without commentary. When it ends, no one speaks for several seconds. "This is indefensible," someone finally says. The question is no longer if the city will pay, only how much. Officer Ethan Cole is called into a different room. Not interrogation, not discipline. Waiting. The room reserved for people whose futures have already been decided, even if no one has said it aloud yet. No threats are made. None are needed. The footage does that work. Across town, Judge Grant sits at her desk. Warm light, familiar weight, papers aligned. Here, no one interrupts her. No one raises their voice. She begins to write, not with anger, with precision. Each paragraph names a violation. Each timestamp anchors a claim. She does not tell a story. The cameras already did that. She translates it into consequences. Unlawful detention. Unlawful arrest. Fourth Amendment violations. Equal protection. No rhetoric. No flourish. Just law. Applied cleanly. Outside, the first video clip surfaces. Then another angle. Then another. The narrative escapes institutional control. Commentators begin to dissect. Analysts pause frames. The story spreads faster than statements can catch it. The system is now reacting, not steering. Omniscient judgment settles over the scene. Cold and certain. Release is not absolution. An apology is not closure. And time is no longer on their side. From this moment forward, the outcome is fixed. Only the scale remains unknown. The countdown has begun. The video does not ask permission. It leaves the parking garage and enters the public bloodstream, the way truth always does, without ceremony, without context, without mercy. First a short clip, then a longer cut, then the angles align. Sound meets image. Sequence meets motive. What looked isolated becomes unmistakable. By morning, the footage has escaped containment. Local feeds pick it up first. Grainy headlines, cautious language, incident under review, officer involved. The euphemisms last hours, not days. By noon, national outlets are running it on loop. By nightfall, the legal analysts arrive, and the tone changes. They do not argue. They point. Pause at the command. Pause at the refusal. Pause at the cuffs. This is unlawful detention, one says flatly. That arrest has no probable cause, another adds. Qualified immunity does not survive this, a third concludes. When lawyers stop hedging, institutions start calculating. The city issues a statement, carefully worded, regretful without admission, concerned without accountability. The omniscient judgment is immediate and unforgiving. Apologies delivered after exposure are not ethics. They are damage control. The comments do not care. Stories pour in. Variations on a theme. Different streets, different times. Same pattern. The public recognizes itself in the footage, and recognition is combustible. Civil rights groups circulate the video with annotations, timestamps, case law. The narrative sharpens. This is no longer one officer. This is a mirror. Phones light up in city offices. Council members ask for briefings they will later deny requesting. The police chief schedules a press conference and cancels it twice before settling on a script that says as little as possible. Every word is weighed against liability, because the price tag has appeared. Analysts begin to say the number out loud. 6 figures first, then higher. They talk about settlements, consent decrees, federal oversight. They talk about precedent. The city hears only one thing. This will cost real money, and money clarifies resolve. An internal investigation is announced. Swift, thorough, independent. The phrases stack up the way they always do when confidence is thin. The officer is placed on administrative leave. The phrase sounds neutral. It is not. Behind closed doors, the footage plays again. Slower this time. No sound, no spin, just actions. The room stays quiet. Someone asks whether the initial call justified the stop. No one answers. Someone asks whether the search request had cause. No one answers. Silence becomes consensus. Outside, the video keeps moving. A second witness posts a longer clip. A third angle confirms the cuffing. A fourth captures the walk. Each upload tightens the net. The city's ability to frame the story collapses under the weight of evidence. The omniscient truth settles in. The system responds not to outrage, but to inevitability. By the end of the week, the language shifts. We are committed to accountability. We will cooperate fully. We take these matters seriously. Each phrase is an admission, wearing a mask. Community leaders demand meetings. Oversight boards schedule hearings. Federal agencies request data, not because they want to, but because they must. The city's options have narrowed to 2. Confront the failure or be forced to. Judge Nyla Grant does not appear on television. She does not grant interviews. She does not issue statements. She lets the footage speak. Silence, here, is strategy. It denies the story a protagonist who can be mischaracterized. It keeps the focus where it belongs, on the facts. The city attorney watches the footage one final time and closes the file without comment. The decision is not moral, it is mathematical. The numbers do not favor denial. They favor surrender managed, negotiated, expensive. In the public sphere, the question changes. It is no longer what happened. It is, how did this keep happening? The answer arrives in fragments, data sets, stop rates, search disparities, patterns that predate the video and outlive it. The footage becomes Exhibit A in a case larger than itself. The city announces reforms, training, reviews, oversight. The omniscient voice notes the order of operations. First exposure, then reform, never the reverse. Still, something has shifted. For the audience watching at home, dopamine arrives not as celebration, but as confirmation. The feeling is quiet and heavy, the truth held, the lie failed, the powerful were forced to respond. The city has begun to pay not just in money, but in credibility, and this is only the beginning. The omniscient conclusion closes the frame with cold precision. Publicity did not create accountability. It made evasion impossible. The story has moved beyond the garage, beyond the station, beyond the officer. What remains now is the reckoning, and the bill that will follow. The report is finished. No press conference, no drama, just pages bound together by facts that no longer bend. The findings are laid out in clean language, stripped of emotion, immune to interpretation. When truth is written this plainly, it stops negotiating. Unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, racial profiling. Each violation stands alone. Together, they form a pattern that cannot be defended. The omniscient verdict is simple. Once documented, misconduct loses its camouflage. The decision follows quickly. Termination. For cause. No reassignment, no early retirement, no quiet transfer to a different badge in a different city. One signature does what 20 years of routine once protected. The pen moves. The name is struck from the roster. Benefits end where accountability begins. A career does not collapse here. It is deleted. The union reviews the footage next. They watch in silence. They pause, rewind, watch again. The calculus is brief and merciless. Some cases can be argued. This one cannot. They decline representation. The omniscient truth lands without cruelty. No one stands beside the unsalvageable. Loyalty ends where evidence becomes fatal. Appeals are considered and abandoned. Every pathway loops back to the same images. The cuffs, the command, the refusal to stop. Each frame closes another door. The system does not rage. It simply removes. The consequences extend outward, permanent, and precise. The termination letter travels. Databases update. Background checks return a single, unignorable result. Agencies do not debate hiring someone whose dismissal is now synonymous with the case itself. The name becomes shorthand. The file becomes a warning. A career does not end with noise. It ends with ineligibility. Across town, Judge Nyla Grant returns to the bench. There is no statement prepared, no victory lap, no measured smile for the cameras. She takes her seat, opens the docket, and calls the next case. The work resumes exactly where it left off. Power restored does not announce itself. The omniscient observation is unambiguous. Real authority requires no proof. It functions quietly, consistently, without apology. Beyond the individual, the system adjusts. Mandatory training becomes policy. Oversight gains teeth. Data is audited. Early warning systems are installed not because they are innovative, but because they are overdue. Federal monitors arrive with clipboards and timelines. The language is procedural. The effect is structural. One person is removed. An institution is forced to correct. This is not reform by inspiration. It is reform by consequence. The settlement follows, negotiated, not debated. Numbers circulate, then settle into reality. The city signs, the check clears, the cost is absorbed where it belongs. Accountability, at last, has a ledger. Judge Grant directs the outcome without ceremony. Funds are allocated to the work that should have prevented this in the first place. The gesture is not symbolic. It is corrective. The omniscient voice holds the frame steady. Catharsis does not need applause. It needs finality. There is no redemption arc for the villain. No interview explaining perspective. No late apology crafted for sympathy. The system does not require remorse to proceed. It requires resolution. And it has it. In the public memory, the case condenses into a single truth. Authority that refuses correction invites erasure. Not slowly, not partially, completely. The final image is not the firing, not the settlement, not the headlines. It is the ordinary return of order. A courtroom in session. A bench occupied. A city quieter than before. The omniscient conclusion closes the record with calm certainty. He believed he was arresting a woman without consequence. He activated a sentence against himself. No celebration. No raised voices. No triumphant music. Just silence. Just balance restored. Just the quiet weight of power doing what it does best. Ending what refuses to stop.